Hey, it's Drybear. Back again with another Diablo 4 build guide, and today I'm going to teach you how to level efficiently and effectively with your Necromancer. I'm going to give you two optimized leveling builds for preference, whichever one you like choosing, explain why they're good and why they're optimized, and we'll go through the whole process as well. Separate from this video, I have a general leveling video that goes over all the mechanics you need to be aware of to level your character effectively. You'll find that link down below in the description, as well as the two builds that I have made on the sheet. You'll be able to find those in the description. You can click and follow along as you're leveling. But first, you should come hang out with me on my live stream. I'm live every single day on twitch.tv/Drybear. If you don't come hang out with me in the community, then you'll suddenly have an urge to sneeze the next few hours, but won't be able to sneeze. You'll just be left making that really weird sneeze face. We'll begin with the first build, which is going to be Bone. This is easily the best leveling build. Bone scales exceptionally well for leveling. This will take you all the way up and through the capstone dungeon that allows you to unlock nightmare difficulty, and it's very strong and very easy. So this one is going to be the one that I recommend for most Necromancer players. And the second build I have for you is a minion build, because I see so many people asking me, can I play minions? Is it okay if I play minions? All the meta people are telling me that minions suck. I want to play minions. I want to be a summoner. So I will have a leveling build for you that does focus on minions. It does do well. It doesn't do as well as this Bone one, but if you're just playing and enjoying the game and enjoying the story, this will clear all content. And when you get to level 50, you will be able to do the capstone dungeon. It just may be a little bit slower if that's something that doesn't bother you. We'll start with my build just like we always do, with the start of the skill tree, starting with the builder. Anytime you are running Bone, you want to get as much Bone as you possibly can, because there's so much synergy. Like, amount of times you deal Bone damage gets special effects. Bone damage resets cooldown. Bone damage increases bone damage. So you want to line up as much of your abilities to deal that type of damage as possible, because there's so much synergy between it. So for builder, we're obviously, since we're doing a Bone build, we're going to be taking Bone Splinters. This one is kind of like a little mini shotgun. You want to do it at pretty close range to get good value out of it. And it does generate essence, and it does damage when it hits. Plus, it's kind of fun to shoot it out. It will deal, for additional projectiles, it will have more damage if, it will fire additional projectiles if you have more essence. For both Bone Splinters and for Bone Spear, the more essence, the better. And then we're going to pick it up so that it has a chance per hit to make enemies vulnerable. Vulnerable is one of the best stats in the game, and leveling is no exception. It is just a pure, unadulterated damage amp that applies to everything. It's so good. So you want to try to always get vulnerable in your build if you can. The star of the show here is going to be our core skill, Bone Spear. There are some easy to get legendaries that we'll talk about in a second. For these leveling builds, I only put legendaries in that you can get easily from the codex and from dungeons in the campaign, not ones you have to wait for a drop for. And I don't even have the other ones filled out. You can fill out however you want. The goal here is to make a lightweight leveling build that works for you, that you can follow as you get into the game. So we're gonna pick up Bone Spear. We're gonna get the modifier that makes it so that it breaks into 3 shards when it's destroyed. So if you hit a wall or it fizzles out, it'll break into 3 shards. And then Bone Spear makes the first enemy hit vulnerable, which is excellent for a single target. And remember, when we're doing Bone Splinters, we apply vulnerable as well, which is always really, really good. For leveling, I always recommend people to get your abilities first. Go through the tree, get your abilities, get the modifiers for them, work your way down, get your ultimate, and then, work towards this. And then backtrack and start getting your passives, because they will, pound for pound, they won't be as valuable, but some of them are really good. So just make sure you will have your points in, like level up Bone Spear, get your abilities, and then work your way back getting passives. For the passives in the core tree, we're going to want to pick up max essence, and core skills cost more essence but deal increased damage. Most Bone Spear and Bone Essence or Bone Spirit builds will focus on having high essence when you cast. So costing more but dealing more damage just fits that mentality so easily and so directly that it all makes sense. And one of the best passives for almost all Necro builds, unless they don't care about corpses at all, is Hewed Flesh. Lucky hit chance to spawn a corpse. This is so easy. I've had people ask me, especially for like corpse explosion builds and minion builds, we have to resummon minions to heal them. Where are you getting your corpses? Why are there corpses? Why don't you have more corpse generation? And the answer is Hewed Flesh. Hewed Flesh actually does spawn quite a lot of corpses, and the chance to spawn when you get a lucky hit is doubled against bosses. If you don't know what lucky hit is, I have several videos on it you can find on my channel that explains that mechanic. but it just gives you a proc chance to spawn a corpse. Coming into defensive, if you want, you can run either Blood Mist or Bone Prison. Both of them are fine. You can get Essence from Bone Prison. You can get Vulnerable from Bone Prison. You can even make Bone Prison explode when it expires. Blood Mist is one of the best immunities in the game. You become immune and untargetable for 3 seconds. You heal. You can make it so that you get Fortify from it as well. All of it really good. But I think for this build specifically, having a way to use the corpses effectively, since we're not going to be running minions other than the golem, is really useful. And on top of that, we can spawn corpses, trigger the explosion with Corpse Explosion, put points into it for more damage. We can increase the radius, which gives it more AoE, and we can make it so that it creates a dot area. It's a deployable field of shadow that deals damage over time, which will allow you can kite around it, you can use it, you can put it on bosses. It gives you tons of options. And remember, we're spawning corpses pretty regularly from that as well. We come down into the cursed category, and while leveling, I always recommend Decrepify. It is a very easy way to get damage, especially if you want to run amplify damage on that. It gives you a little bonus of % damage. It slows, and it's damage reduction. So it makes the targets deal less damage. So when you fight a particularly tough enemy, you Decrepify them and you lower the damage they take. But the reason Decrepify is so good for leveling, not just for the damage reduction, is for the last split here. So we're going to lucky hit to have a chance to stun, whatever. It's kind of free. We don't really care all that much, but it's kind of free. Is this one right here. Lucky hit chance, enemies hit while afflicted with Decrepify, which means if they're cursed, any source of damage that you deal to them will have a lucky hit proc chance to reduce all of your active cooldowns by 1 second. It resets your defensives, it resets your ultimate and gets it back faster. So whatever ultimate you choose, I think actually all 3 of the ultimates, I don't think this is true for many classes, but for Necro, I think you could run any one of the ultimates for leveling and it would be just fine. They're all pretty good. But when you run this Decrepify modifier, it means you can reset those cooldowns quickly and easily and get good value out of it. So we're going to run that for sure. We're gonna come down here, and you can run Corpse Tendrils if you want. If you decide to not run a Golem, which I do recommend running while you're leveling, it just makes it easier and more survivable. You can run Corpse Tendrils, and Corpse Tendrils doesn't consume the corpse either. You're spawning a lot of corpses as well. You can stun enemies. What's great about this is you can pull all the enemies in with Corpse Tendrils. It'll stun them if they can be stunned. And then remember, when we do a Corpse Explosion, it creates a pulsing AoE shadow damage field, which means that you pull them all into the corpse and then detonate it. They're in the field. It feels really good. So if you don't want to run a Golem, you certainly can run this instead. You get a slow on it. And then for this, I recommend just getting Vulnerable if you have trouble maintaining it, or you can get the Blood Orb, which gives you plenty of options to scale off of as well. Because we're primarily bone damage, this little triangle, this little diamond underneath the Macabre tree is bonkers. It's so incredibly good. There's so many bone builds that take good use of this, and our leveling bone spear build will be no different. Serration gives us increased crit chance for each 10 essence you have upon cast. Remember, we want to get max essence for our bone spear and then spend it, so we get bonus damage on that. We also want to make it so that when we have more, it costs more essence but does more damage. Put all of that together, it gets even better. This is also exceptionally good for Bone Spirit, but I don't think Bone Spirit's that great for leveling. For Compound Fracture, after critically striking 10 times with Bone Skills, remember, we have 2 Bone Skills, both Bone Shards, or Bone Splinters and Bone Spear are Bone Skills. And we're going to run a Bone Ultimate, which means as that's ticking, you're dealing damage. Some of those are critically striking, and then you're triggering Compound Fracture, which makes all of your Bone Skills deal increased damage for 5 seconds. You start to deal ridiculous damage. The last one here, Evulsion's nice. Your Bone Skills deal increased critical damage to vulnerable enemies, which means that all that guaranteed critical strike that we have in this now gets scaled more with crit damage, and we have plenty of ways to apply vulnerable, which is very easy. And then for the last tree here, again, we're going to pick up Bone Storm. Anytime you run Bone Storm, it is worth considering picking up a Golem, because it just doubles the damage output of it. It gives you some really nice bonuses. This ultimate synergizes insanely well with a Golem. So having this means that you should think about, okay, do I want a Golem in this build? I think while leveling, you absolutely do. The Golem is super nice. He's your best friend. He only takes up 1 skill slot, so it's not like you're wasting a whole bunch. He does good damage. You can make him spawn corpses. You can make him heal you. You can make him absorb damage for you. It's so good. So we're going to run Bone Storm with that. Since we're running a Golem, we're going to run Golem Mastery. damage and life of your golem by 75%. This is a huge difference. Next, for survivability, since we're not running skeletal minions, we're not going to get anything here. But anytime you're running a golem or no minions, consider these two nodes super valuable. Standalone makes it so that you get 18% damage reduction, reduced by 2% for each active minion. So even if you have a golem, you're still getting 16% damage reduction, which is massive. On top of that, if you sacrifice both your warriors and your mages, which we are in this build, it increases the bonuses you get from that sacrifice by 60%. I have a feeling they're going to nerf this, but it's so good. It's insanely strong. Then for the last option, you have your blood build, your shadow build, your minion build, and your bone build. The key passives for Necro are very straightforward. So we're bones, so we're going to pick up ossified essence. Bone skills deal increased damage for each point of essence you have when you above 50 when you spend. So by the way, having max essence is great because then you get more of that. But also any of the bone builds that run that will end up picking up a lot of maximum essence, because having more available essence above 50 means that you can do more damage with your bone skills. So your general rotation is going to be using bone splinters to build up full essence, spend on the bone spear, use your splinters again, spend on bone spear. If any corpses appear, detonate them instantly with corpse explosion. If you run into difficult enemies like elites or bosses or anything that doesn't die instantly, decrepify it, and otherwise just let your golem and bone storm go to town for that extra bonus. So that is the leveling process. This build is probably the best leveling build out there. You'll be able to clear all the way through the campaign and finish the capstone dungeon in order to get to your world tier 3 and start your end game process. So all of that's good to go. For gear here, for the gems, I would recommend crit damage to vulnerable enemies. Crit damage works great for bone builds that crit naturally very highly, and we have tons of vulnerability, so that's really cool. I actually like getting damage reduction while controlled and paired on this. You don't have to, but because we didn't get as much damage reduction, like we didn't get blood mist or bone prison from this, I think having this is really nice. So anytime you have CC on you for any reason, you get free damage reduction. And I think for this build is one of the few builds where I actually would run this while leveling. Most builds don't because they have plenty of survivability, but I think this build needs it. And because you're going to be pretty close for bone splinters and using your bone storm, anytime you're in melee range, I recommend armor. If you're farther away, I recommend resistance. For your minions, I would recommend blood golem. Now I know at level 25 you unlock bone, so you can pick up bone. You can make it so that you spawn corpses for more detonations, or you can get more life on the golem if you want, super nice. But once you get blood, that's when things really start to work for you. And iron's great too, it just comes on a little bit later on. So blood has two options here. One, while you're healthy, your blood golem gains damage reduction and 50% increased damage, which will apply to his bone storm, by the way. So you get incredible damage while you're staying alive, while you're keeping yourself going. The other option, if you don't want to think about your max HP and what it's at, and you don't want to, micromanage that resource, by the way, healthy is 80% HP or higher, then you can just run for the first option, which is foolproof. It's just a flat passive. You and your golem takes some of the damage you take, which is in effect a damage reduction of 15%, which is pretty cool. Once you get iron, I think he's awesome because he has a big AoE slam. You can also make him apply vulnerable if you need to, but this slam is nothing to laugh at while you're leveling, by the way. I mean, that doesn't really do too much at the end game, but while you're leveling, it's really cool and it's fun to watch, which is really fun. We're gonna sacrifice both our warriors and our mages because there's no room for in the build. And like for Necro, if you're gonna run a minion build, it comes with a requirement of spending a significant amount of invested points, gear, and stats into keeping them alive. If you have naked, natty, oregano minions, they will die to any boss. You cannot keep them alive unless they decide to buff it or change it. So for the second build I'll give you, which is a minion build, we'll go through all the ways you can keep your minions alive, but I would not really ever run skeletal warriors or mages by themselves without any support, because then they'll just collapse and die, and it's not great. So for this, we're going to sacrifice both the warriors and the mages. I think for bone, it makes sense to get the free 5% crit chance. Remember, when we have the passive here at the bottom of the Necro tree, if you sacrifice both warriors and mages, it increases their sacrifice bonus by 60%. So that is going to be 6 times 5 is 3%. So this turns this 5% into 8% crit chance. Awesome. And then for this, I think you just want to do sacrifice on your cold minions here. It's free damage, 50% increased damage to vulnerable enemies. vulnerable's already busted OP, add 50% to that, and then scale this by 60% again. Even better. It's so good. This gives you tons of damage. So that's the core build for that process. Now, legendaries. Obviously, you want to use whatever you can get, and I didn't want to put a full build here so that this shows like, hey, when you get all these drops and everything comes online, you put this unique in here and you have your ancestrals and everything. I just wanted this to be a very approachable leveling build that you can use for your character. So I've put in some very easy to get Codex of Power legendaries that you can get by completing dungeons. All of these are Codex of Power. You can just go do whatever it says on them and you'll get them. And then you can imprint them on any item that's yellow or blue or just yellow. And then you'll be able to get them in your build and it's not too hard. If you haven't watched my general leveling build, leveling guide, I recommend not trying to imprint anything in your main armor pieces or your weapon or offhand. The reason being is that you want to get the best possible stats from your armor and your weapon and offhand so that you're at your strongest at all times. You don't really want to be sacrificing your salvage materials or your gold to constantly be reprinting new weapons every 5 levels. It's really going to tax you. You're going to run out of gold and have none very quickly. So instead, what I recommend is to put all your necessary build-defining legendaries on your accessories because they have the lowest leveling import, like the stats you get from rings and amulet for leveling aren't as important. So you can get by fine by having outdated accessories. It's really just the power that you want. And then I think boots is a free one too. If you find boots with movement speed on them and you want to like imprint it to have movement speed as well, or some kind of useful movement passive for your legendary, I think that's great. It makes the build really clean. For this, Windstriker aspect is amazing. You can get this in Ship to Ruins. We're critting like absolute monsters with bone builds, so we're critting all the time, and this will make us move faster, which is really nice. Necros at base are pretty slow. Necros and Druids just move slower in general, but you have these there. Splintering aspect is nice. You can pick this up in the Dry Steppes. Bone Spear's primary attack makes enemies hit beyond the first vulnerable. And remember, we've already modified it so that when it hits, it makes them vulnerable, which is really cool. So the first enemy becomes vulnerable, and then when it travels through that enemy, it now makes them vulnerable as well. And bone shards from Bone Spear, when it breaks and shatters into shards, deal bonus damage to targets that have vulnerable and they pierce through. So you're going to shoot out the Bone Spear, it's going to break into fragments and shoot back. And all the targets are vulnerable. The bone shards do more damage and they pierce as well, which makes Bone Spear infinitely more powerful. It's super cool. For this as well, sacrifice bonuses are increased by 25%. You get this in the Ruins of Eridu. Very easy. That just gives us more damage to vulnerable and more crit chance. It just makes all of our bone damage go up quite significantly. And then crit strikes from the aspect of Torment with bone skills increase your essence regeneration. You can get this by completing the Black Asylum. Pretty easy to get a little bit later on, but you can still get it and then you can imprint it and you're good to go. So that is the bone build. That is what I would consider the best leveling build for Necromancer. But I don't want to leave you high and dry, especially all those people out there that I feel are being abandoned by content creators where they want to play minions and everyone's saying, don't have fun, play bone, stop having fun. I'm going to save you. I got your back. Let's talk about a leveling minion build. So this is my leveling minion build for Necromancer. The only challenge here is your initial like 10, 15 levels are going to be kind of awkward because we spend a lot of our points towards the bottom of the tree. So if you really need to, you can use the first build, the bone build, to get to like level 15 or 20, and then you can swap over to this and it should work just fine. Again, you won't clear as quickly as bone, but you'll still have lots of fun. And as long as you have enough corpses to heal your minions, everything should work out just fine. Starting at the top, we're going to get Decompose. This one is a very easy way to generate corpses at a pseudo rate. It has a decent lucky hit chance for how often it hits. Combine that with Hued Flesh and you'll be spawning corpses regularly. So we're going to pick up Decompose as our builder. We're also going to get Enhanced Decompose, which means that if we're channeling on the enemy, you gain essence, which is really cool. And then the next one's super important. You and your minions deal X 10% increased damage to enemies who are being decomposed. Right now, there are additive damage multipliers, there's additive damage scalars, and there's multiplicative damage scalars. It seems that they're intending for the additive ones to have a plus and the X to signify multiplicative. So this one actually does have really good value on it, especially for full minion builds. But you know, they may end up changing that, or we may be surprised. But overall, this should be a very nice increase for both you and for your minions. Going into the spender category for core skills, Of course, we're going to pick up Hued Flesh. That's our lucky hit chance to spawn a corpse. We like that. And on top of that, I like picking up Blight. You can run Bone Spear, by the way. There's not really anything stopping you from running Bone Spear with your minion build. We're just not going to invest in bone passives, but it's still insanely good. Probably the best leveling skill for all of Necromancer. But for this build, I like running Blight. It's a big area of effect with shadow damage. You can, when your minions are attacking, especially your golem, they'll be gathered in one spot. You have all the shadow damage ticking, but on top of that, it'll slow enemies, which puts them in the crowd control category. And you and your minions deal X 15% increased damage to enemies with Blight. So X 15% and X 10% for you and your minions while they're attacking the target. Super cool. So we're coming down here to this here. We cannot run Corpse Explosion in this build. If you didn't know, the way you maintain your skeletal minions is by re-summoning them. So it says raise skeleton, but this is how the logic works for the summoning. If you have no skeletal minions, when you cast raise skeleton, the first priority is to summon skeletal warriors. Every time you cast raise skeleton on a corpse, it will summon a skeletal warrior until you have your maximum amount of skeletal warriors. That's priority number 1. Priority number 2 is if you it'll summon skeletal mages. So when the skeletal warriors are maxed out, your next cast of raise skeleton on a corpse will summon a skeletal mage, and then it'll keep summoning mages until you have your full amount of mages and you're maxed out on your skeletons. Then, if you cast Raise Skeleton on a corpse again, when you have maximum minions, it will summon a skeletal priest, which will heal your minions and increase their damage. Huge. So every time you consume a corpse with Raise Skeleton, you're healing all of your minions and increasing their damage. So that's part of the rotation for a minion build, is to constantly be buffing and healing your minions while you're going about it. So for that reason, we can't really be spending corpses on explosion because we need to be keeping our minions alive, and getting 20% damage for all of our minions every time we cast it is worth doing repeatedly. So we're going to skip that for now and just use our corpses for buffing and healing our minions. We're getting minions, so we're going to pick up every single one of the minion passives. Skeletal Warrior Mastery exists in the defensive tree. Increase the damage and life of your skeletal warriors by 45% for all of them. You can see already how if you don't invest in minions, they become pretty squishy. The passives here are really nice. Consuming a corpse generates 9 essence, and you deal 9% increased damage for 6 seconds after consuming a corpse. Remember, we're spawning a bunch with Hued Flesh and Decompose, and our ultimate as well. And then every time we consume those to buff and heal our minions, we get essence, which means we can throw out another Blight, and we can get more damage scaling for our minions. Super fun. We're gonna go down here, and again, while leveling, you wanna get Decrepify, one of the best leveling skills. It gives a slow, which helps your minions catch up with mobs that might be fast. That's another issue that minions have right now, is sometimes they don't have a little spring in their step, and that's okay. Then it's a damage reduction as well. So all enemies that are decrepified will deal less damage, not only to you, but to your minions as well, which is crucial for keeping them alive. We also have the chance to stun, which, you know, it's fine. And then obviously Abhorrent Decrepify is huge. Enemies that are hit while they have Decrepify have a chance to lower your cooldowns. Big stuff. That's really big. That really is just for our ultimate for the most part. And it should work on active cooldowns for your golem as well, but just something to think about. You also want to get bonus damage here because we have the free point since we're investing in minions, and you want to increase the damage and life of your skeletal mages by a whopping 60%. Definitely an easy pickup there. Down here, we're not running bone, we're not running blood. You could mess with gruesome mending. It's not terrible while leveling. When you're below 50% life, you receive more healing. So if you put points into this, you can get bonus healing. This affects your potion as well. So anytime you're at half life or below, you get your potion is more effective. So while leveling, that's not bad. And then here you can also pick up some extra movement speed. Necros need movement speed across the board, and you're not going to have as much as the bone build because you won't be getting the crit movement speed from that as well. Then we're going to come down to the creme de la creme, the strawberry on top, the ultimate tree. There's so much value in here for minion builds. We're going to come over and we're going to pick up Army of the Dead. What's great about this is while it's active, skeletons will emerge and explode and they'll deal damage. When the skeletons explode, they have a chance to leave a corpse, which allows us to buff and heal our minions. And Army of the Dead also raises your skeletal warriors and mages. So those are always being refreshed. You can use the corpses for healing and buffing. All of that is really cool. And by the way, this ultimate is required for minion builds, and I'll explain why once we get to the gear. You also want to increase the damage life of your golem by 75%. That one's just free. Down here, we pick up Bonded and Essence. Every 5 seconds, your Skeletal Priest healing will heal your skeletons for an additional 60% of their max life. So whatever damage they're taking, every 5 seconds, your raised skeleton skill that creates the Skeletal Priest heals for a fat ton amount for all of your skeletons. Huge. After you've been healthy for at least 4 seconds, you and your minions gain attack speed. So you want to kind of sit back, let your minions do the work, buff them up, keep yourself healthy as you give your minions attack speed, which is nice. And then Hellbent Commander, your minions deal increased damage when you are close to them. I haven't really found a good way to explain close to people accurately. Just know that you have to be within, I don't know, if you think the range of reap, about that is what close is, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm going to try and find a good measurement visually to understand. Just be near your minions, kind of right behind them in melee range, and you'll get this bonus, which is nice. Your minions cannot lose more than 45% of their max life from a single damage instance. This means they can't be one-shot, they cannot be two-shot, they can be three-shot, technically, if it maths out right. I guess it depends on the source of damage, but this makes it insanely strong, right? This gives you a very big damage reduction for them, which keeps them alive longer. Then lastly, we pick up the Kalen's Edict. After you have not taken damage in the last 3 seconds, your minions gain attack speed, and while you have at least 7 minions, which we have plenty, this bonus is doubled. So you're gonna get so much more out of that. And remember, if you're healthy, your minions gain attack speed. If you haven't taken damage, your minions get attack speed. 30% from this, 12% for this. When you stand near them, they do more damage. Then you have, on top of that, right, you have the damage scaler from Supernatural Blight, the damage scaler from Acolytes Decompose, and then you have ways to heal them and all that. So all of that really adds to it to give you a really nice value. But again, a lot of the value comes when you get down here towards the curse, and definitely when you get to the final point. So if you wanted to, you could run the other leveling build until you get to about 20, 25, and then you can switch over and have fun with your minions. I do have an endgame minion build that is on my channel. It isn't perfect yet. I still have a lot of changes to make to it, but it does have a Paragon board and gear and all of that if you wanted a step after this one for what to do with Necro. So those are the 2 Necro builds. I recommend Bone, but if you want minions, I wanted to make sure the minion, the summoners out there are being represented and not being left behind. So there you go. There's some options for you. Have fun out there. If you found value in the video, leave me a like down below. Leave a comment. It helps me out tremendously. The algorithm picks up that activity and helps the video get seen by more people and helps me out directly as well. Come by my live stream. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them and chat with you. But otherwise, see you in the next one. If you enjoyed yourself today, leave a like down below. You can support me and my work on Patreon and view Patreon exclusive content. Link in the description. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.